The first time I walked this field, the water was up to my ankles in the middle of April. Not a pond, not a creek, not a drainage ditch overflow. The field itself, all 34 acres of it, was sitting under 6 inches of standing water that had nowhere to go. The previous owner had tried to farm it for 9 years. 9 years of watching the water arrive in November and not leave until June. 9 years of planting late, harvesting less, losing equipment in the mud, and watching the neighbors on the well-drained ground to the north put their crops in 3 weeks earlier every single spring. When I asked him why he was selling, he looked at the water standing in his field and said something I have never forgotten. Some ground just doesn't want to be farmed. I looked at that same water and thought something completely different. I thought, this ground doesn't have a farming problem. It has a water timing problem, and water timing problems have solutions. Before we get into exactly how I solved it, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Your state, your country, wherever you are. I read every single comment and I want to know who's out there watching, because I have a feeling a lot of you have seen ground just like this. Ground that everyone wrote off. Ground that just needed the right question asked about it. What the county drainage records revealed about this specific 34-acre field, going back to the 1940s, is something that reframed the entire history of failure on this land. And once I understood it, the solution was closer than anyone had realized. Richland County sits in the southeastern corner of Illinois, in the broad valley of the Wabash River that forms the border between Illinois and Indiana. The land here is old alluvial plain, deposited by glacial meltwater thousands of years ago, flat as a table, with soils that are among the most naturally fertile in the world when they are dry, and among the most frustrating in the world when they are wet. The soil type across most of Richland County's lowland areas is a drummer silty clay loam, a dark, rich organic material that formed under the prairie grasses that covered this landscape before European settlement. Drummer soil is classified as a prime farmland soil. Its natural fertility is extraordinary. Its natural drainage is essentially non-existent. The prairie that built this soil over thousands of years did so under conditions of periodic flooding. The grasses were adapted to wet feet, to standing water in spring, to the particular rhythm of a landscape that floods and drains and floods again. Modern agriculture is not adapted to that rhythm. Modern agriculture needs the field dry in April, dry in May, consistently workable from planting through harvest. And drummer silty clay loam, without intervention, does not offer that. The 34 acres I purchased had a drainage history that the county tile drainage district records showed clearly. In the 1940s, a previous owner had installed a partial tile drainage system. Main collector lines, but no lateral lines, addressing the surface drainage without addressing the root zone saturation that was the actual problem. In the 1970s, another owner had extended the system slightly, but had used undersized pipe that had since collapsed in 2 critical sections. The result was a drainage system that was worse than no system at all. It gave the appearance of having been addressed while actually channeling water into the field from adjacent areas rather than out of it. 9 years of the most recent owner farming around a broken drainage system that nobody had properly diagnosed. I pulled the county drainage district maps and the original 1940s installation records and spread them on the hood of my truck at the field edge. The picture they showed was not a field that couldn't be farmed. It was a field that had never been properly drained. The specific drainage assessment I commissioned and the number the drainage engineer gave me when he finished walking the field is something that changed the entire financial calculus of this project. Stay with me, because this is the moment the impossible became possible. I hired a drainage engineer from Olney, a man named Frank, who had been designing tile drainage systems in southeastern Illinois for 28 years and who had seen every variation of the drummer soil drainage problem that this part of the state could produce. Frank spent a full day on the property. He walked every section, probed the soil profile at multiple points, measured the existing tile locations with GPS equipment, assessed the outlet condition at the drainage district ditch along the southern boundary, and calculated the water table depth across the field during the wet period using piezometer readings he took at 6 locations. At the end of the day, he sat in his truck with his laptop and ran the drainage model. His assessment: the field needed a complete tile drainage system redesign. The existing 1940s main lines were usable. The pipe itself was still intact in the sections that hadn't collapsed, but the collapsed sections needed replacement, and the entire lateral system needed to be installed from scratch. 4-inch perforated corrugated pipe at 40-foot spacing, installed at a depth of 30 inches across the full 34 acres, with new connection fittings to the usable sections of the existing main and a new outlet control structure at the drainage ditch. The cost was significant, more than the land had cost to purchase. I did the math 3 ways. Every calculation came out the same. A properly drained drummer silty clay loam field in Richland County, Illinois, farmed on the same schedule as the well-drained ground to the north, was worth between 4 and 6 times what a chronically waterlogged field of the same acreage was worth. The drainage investment would pay for itself in 3 to 4 years of normal production. I called Frank the next morning and told him to design the system. The morning the drainage installation equipment arrived, the GPS-guided tile plow that would install more pipe in 3 days than the 1940s crew had installed in 3 weeks. The morning 34 acres of flooded field began its transformation. I want to show you exactly what happened. Frank's drainage system design was precise. The GPS coordinates of every lateral line, every connection point, every outlet location loaded into the tile plow's guidance system before the first foot of pipe went into the ground. The contractor, a drainage installation company from Lawrenceville that Frank had worked with for 15 years, arrived with a modern GPS-guided tile plow that could install 4-inch corrugated pipe at 30 inches depth with a grade accuracy of 1/100th of a foot per 100 feet. 1/100th of a foot. The difference between water moving toward the outlet and water sitting in the pipe going nowhere. The first lateral went in on a Tuesday morning. The tile plow moved across the drummer silty clay at a steady walking pace, the GPS guidance system holding it precisely on the designed line, the pipe unreeling from the drum on the back of the machine and disappearing into the soil behind the shank. A thin slit in the dark field surface that closed almost immediately as the disturbed soil rebounded. By Thursday evening, all 34 acres had lateral lines at 40-foot spacing. The collapsed sections of the 1940s main had been replaced. The new outlet control structure was in place at the drainage ditch. The system was complete. Frank walked the field one final time with a GPS receiver, verifying that every lateral was at its designed depth and grade. When he finished, he looked at his readings and nodded once. "This field will be fit to plant by April 15th in a normal year," he said. The previous owner had never planted before June 15th. 2 months. The tile drainage system had given this field 2 months of growing season that it had never had. What the soil test revealed after the drainage system had been running for its first full winter, after the water table had dropped to 30 inches for the first time in this field's documented history, is something that I need you to hear. Because the ground that was sitting under 6 inches of standing water in April was hiding something extraordinary. The soil test came back from the University of Illinois Extension Lab, and I read it standing at the field edge in early March, the drainage system running its first full winter drawdown. The dark, drummer, silty clay surface dry enough to walk on for the first time since November. Organic matter, 5.4%. The accumulated legacy of thousands of years of prairie grass decomposition, protected under the anaerobic conditions of the chronically wet soil, never mined by decades of successful crop production, because successful crop production had never been possible here. pH 6.8, nearly perfect for most Midwest row crops and vegetables without any amendment. Phosphorus and potassium high. The waterlogging that had prevented farming had also prevented the nutrient mining that intensive agriculture performs on even the best soils over decades of production. This field had never been successfully farmed, and because it had never been successfully farmed, it still had everything it had started with. The fertility that the drummer soil had built over thousands of years was sitting intact under the water, waiting. The University of Illinois extension agent who reviewed the results, a man named Dr. Harrison, who had been working with southeastern Illinois soils for 16 years, called me after seeing the numbers. "This is pre-agricultural drummer soil chemistry," he said. "I test fields that have been in corn-soybean rotation for 50 years, and I never see numbers like this." "It's never been successfully farmed," I said. A long pause. "Then whoever farms it first," he said, "is going to have a very good time." The infrastructure decision I made after seeing those soil test numbers, a decision that Frank, the drainage engineer, said was unusual for this type of ground, is the reason this farm produces what it produces and sells where it sells. Stay with me. The drummer soil chemistry, the pre-agricultural fertility, the perfect pH, the extraordinary organic matter, pointed clearly toward premium specialty crop production rather than commodity row crops. A 34-acre field of this quality, now properly drained, was capable of producing premium vegetables, herbs, and cut flowers at a scale that a direct market operation could support. But premium specialty crop production in southeastern Illinois requires infrastructure that commodity grain farming does not. Processing space, cold storage, a barn that functions as a working farm hub rather than just equipment storage, and a market access strategy that connects the farm's production to buyers who will pay premium prices for premium quality. I built the barn first, a working structure with a processing area, a walk-in cooler built into the north end, a covered outdoor washing station, and a simple office space where market logistics could be managed. Nothing elaborate. Functional, clean, designed for the specific workflow of washing, packing, and shipping premium vegetables and cut flowers. The road from the county road to the barn was graveled. Year-round access was not negotiable when the business model depended on reliable delivery schedules. And I installed a supplemental drip irrigation system, not because the drummer soil needed supplemental water in normal years, but because the southeastern Illinois summer can deliver 3-week dry periods in July and August that stress crops at exactly the wrong time. The well that served the existing farmstead on the adjacent property was adequate for a drip system on 34 acres. Backup water in a region where the primary challenge had always been too much water rather than too little. Frank, the drainage engineer, when I described the drip system installation, looked at me with the expression of a man who had spent 28 years solving drainage problems, hearing someone describe an irrigation problem. "You're putting water in and taking water out," he said. "At different times," I said. He thought about this for a moment. "That's actually just farming," he said. "The first crop I planted on this Richland County Illinois field, and the specific reason I chose it over everything else that pre-agricultural drummer soil could have grown, produced a result in the first season that brought a Chicago specialty food buyer to the farm personally. Stay with me. The decision to grow sweet corn as the first primary crop was not sentimental. It was chemical. Pre-agricultural drummer soil with 5.4% organic matter and never mind phosphorus and potassium produces sweet corn with a sugar concentration and a tenderness that conventionally farmed soil cannot replicate. The sugars in sweet corn begin converting to starch at the moment of harvest, which is why the sweetest corn is always the corn eaten within hours of picking, and why the sweet corn at a farmer's market from a farm 15 miles away is so dramatically better than the sweet corn at a grocery store that was picked 3 days ago in another state. On pre-agricultural drummer soil with perfect drainage and the full mineral profile intact, the sugar concentration at harvest is higher than conventionally farmed ground to begin with. And within a 50-mile radius of the farm, the farmers' markets in Olney, Mount Carmel, and Vincennes across the Indiana border had a customer base that understood this difference and would pay for it. I planted Silver Queen and Peaches and Cream, 2 varieties specifically selected for the southeastern Illinois summer heat and humidity, across 18 acres of the 34. The remaining 16 acres went to heirloom tomatoes, mixed salad greens, dried beans, and a cut flower section that I designed around the same premium direct market strategy as the sweet corn. The first sweet corn harvest came in late July. I brought the first picking to the Olney Farmers Market on a Saturday morning. 40 dozen ears, harvested at 5 a.m. that morning, in the market by 7:30. I sold out in 55 minutes. A woman buying her 3rd dozen of the morning told me it was the best sweet corn she had eaten since her grandmother's garden. Her grandmother had grown it 40 years ago, on drummer soil, before the drainage problems had made everyone give up. What happened in September of the first full growing season, specifically the phone call I received on a Tuesday afternoon from a number I didn't recognize, changed the direction of the entire farm operation in a single conversation. September on the Richland County farm was the month that proved everything the soil test had promised. The sweet corn season was closing out, the last succession planting finishing its harvest window as the temperatures began dropping. The heirloom tomatoes were at peak production, the Cherokee purple and Brandywine varieties, heavy on their plants in the drummer soil that had given them everything they needed. The dried beans were curing on the vines. The cut flower section was at its most abundant, zinnias and sunflowers and colosseus in the September light. The phone call came from a food procurement manager at a specialty grocery chain in Chicago. She had found the farm through a chef in Vincennes who had been buying the sweet corn at the Mount Carmel market. She wanted to talk about a supply relationship, a Chicago specialty grocery chain, sourcing from a 34-acre farm in Richland County, Illinois, that 9 months earlier had been sitting under 6 inches of standing water in April. I drove to Chicago the following week. She showed me what she was looking for: locally grown, premium quality, documented growing practices, consistent supply across a defined season window, the drummer soil chemistry, the drainage system that had made the field reliably plantable by April 15th, and the direct market infrastructure I had built gave me everything she needed. We signed a supply agreement before I left the city. The field that nobody thought could be farmed was now supplying premium produce to a Chicago specialty grocery chain. Year 2 brought a weather event that I had not prepared for. Not the flooding that had defined this field's history, but the opposite. And the way it arrived without warning on a night in late June is something I want to tell you about because of what it revealed about the soil I had been building on. The derecho arrived at 11 p.m. on a Thursday in late June, a line of severe thunderstorms moving east across Illinois with straight-line winds that the National Weather Service measured at 73 miles per hour at the Olney airport. I was in the farmhouse when it hit. The sound was not like any storm I had experienced, not the rotating pressure of a tornado, but a sustained roar, the sound of a wall of air moving at 70 miles per hour across a flat landscape with nothing to slow it. In 20 minutes it was over. The morning assessment: the barn had lost a section of metal roof on the south side. The cut flower section was flattened, every zinnia and sunflower stem broken or uprooted by the wind. The sweet corn, which had been in its peak eating stage, the most vulnerable time structurally, was lodged, the stalks bent at 45-degree angles from the wind pressure. The lodged corn was the critical problem. Lodged corn is difficult to harvest mechanically and loses quality rapidly as the ears contact the soil. I had 3 days before the sugar conversion would make the current harvest window unmarketable. I called every person I knew in Richland County and the surrounding area who might be available to hand harvest. By 7 a.m. the following morning, I had 11 people in the field. We harvested by hand for 2 days straight, pulling every ear that was still marketable, working from the lodged rows, filling bins that went directly to the Chicago buyer and the farmers' markets without the usual processing step. We saved 70% of the harvest. The drummer soil, the extraordinary organic matter content, the perfect drainage, had given the corn root system enough structural integrity that even 73-mile-per-hour winds had only lodged rather than snapped the stalks at the base. On lighter, less biologically developed soil, the loss would have been complete. The soil had saved the crop. The conversation that surprised me most in 3 years of farming this Richland County field happened at a grain elevator in Olney in October of year 2. And it started with a question from the farmer who owned the well-drained ground to the north that I had always used as the benchmark for what this field should become. His name was Howard. He had farmed the ground north of my field for 32 years, commodity corn and soybeans on well-drained drummer soil that had been properly tiled since the 1960s. He had watched the previous owner struggle with the waterlogged field for 9 years. He had watched me install the drainage system and plant the specialty crops with the particular attentive neutrality of a Midwest farmer, observing something unusual on adjacent ground. He was at the grain elevator on a Tuesday morning in October, when I pulled in with a truckload of dried beans for a specialty food buyer. He looked at the dried beans. "What are those?" he said. "Heirloom dried beans," I said. "Jacob's Cattle and Calypso, going to a specialty food buyer in Vincennes." He was quiet for a moment. "Per bushel price," he said. I told him. He looked at the beans again. "That's 8 times what soybeans are bringing," he said. "Yes, sir," I said. Another long pause, the Midwest farmer's particular silence that precedes a significant statement. "I've got 12 acres on my south end that stay wet until May," he said. "Never tiled it right. Always farmed around it." "Get Frank to look at it," I said. "Frank Hendricks in Olney." He nodded once and drove away. He called Frank the following week, the moment that completed the transformation of this Richland County, Illinois flooded field, the moment that answered the previous owner's "some ground just doesn't want to be farmed," happened on an April morning in year 3 that I want to describe to you precisely. April 15th, year 3. The field was dry, not almost dry, not workable if you're careful dry. The drainage system running its 3rd spring drawdown. The water table at 30 inches below the surface, the dark drummer silty clay at the surface, firm enough to support equipment and produce no compaction. I walked the field at 6 a.m. before the tractor was running. The morning light was the particular horizontal gold of Illinois April, low, long, catching the dark surface of the drummer soil and turning it the deep chocolate color that it only shows when it is perfectly drained and perfectly ready. The previous owner had walked this same field in April, under 6 inches of water, for 9 years. I pressed my hand into the soil. It gave properly the resistance of well-structured, biologically active, perfectly drained prime farmland. The earthworm count in my assessment hole, 38 per cubic foot. The organic matter building from 5.4% to 6.1% in 3 years of managed production. The Chicago specialty grocery relationship was in its 3rd season. The Olney Farmers Market had a waiting list for the sweet corn succession plantings. The heirloom tomatoes were contracted before planting. The dried bean harvest was going to two specialty food buyers. The cut flower section was supplying 3 florists in the Olney and Mount Carmel area, and Howard, the 32-year commodity farmer with the well-drained ground to the north, had installed tile drainage on his wet south 12 acres and called me in March to ask which heirloom bean varieties I recommended for his first specialty crop planting. The field was teaching the county. I want to tell you the specific reason nobody thought this field could be farmed, because it is not the reason most people assume. And understanding it changes how you see every wet, difficult, waterlogged piece of ground you will ever encounter. Nobody thought this field could be farmed because nobody separated the field's problem from the field's potential. The problem? Water timing. The field flooded in winter and spring and drained too slowly for timely planting. This is a solvable engineering problem. The potential, pre-agricultural drummer silty clay loam with 5.4% organic matter, never mind fertility, and perfect natural pH. This is one of the most productive soil types in the world. The previous owners had seen the problem and assumed it defined the potential. They had looked at 6 inches of standing water in April and concluded that this was what the field was. A wet field, an unreliable field, a field that didn't want to be farmed. What the field actually was, a perfectly preserved natural treasure sitting behind a solvable engineering problem. The water that had prevented farming had also prevented the soil degradation that decades of intensive agriculture performs on even the best ground. The field was wet precisely because its soils were so fine-textured and so organic matter-rich that they held water tenaciously. The same properties that made them extraordinarily productive once the excess water was removed. The drainage system did not improve the soil, it revealed it. Frank, the drainage engineer, said something at the end of the year 3 field visit that I have thought about many times since. He was looking at the earthworm count assessment I had done and the organic matter reading from the year 3 soil test. In 28 years, he said, I have never seen a field improve this fast after drainage installation. It's not improving, I said. It's just showing what it always was. The 34 acres of Richland County, Illinois flooded field that nobody thought could be farmed is now in its 4th growing season. The drainage system runs reliably. The field is plantable by April 15th in every normal year. The soil organic matter has continued building. The biological community that the drainage created continues adding structure and fertility at a rate that surprises me every time I test it. The Chicago specialty grocery relationship continues. The Olney Farmers Market sweet corn succession is sold out before it plants. The heirloom tomatoes go to 2 restaurants and a specialty market. The dried beans have found a regional food hub buyer who sells them under the farm's name. The cut flower operation supplies 5 florists across 2 counties. Howard farmed his south 12 acres in specialty crops for the first time last summer. He called me after his first farmer's market appearance, a Saturday in August, with sweet corn from his newly drained drummer soil. Sold out in 40 minutes, he said. How does it feel? I said. A long Midwest pause. Like I've been leaving money in the mud for 30 years, he said. The previous owner drove past the farm in October of year 3. He slowed at the field edge. I could see his truck from the barn, and looked at the field for a long time. Then he drove away. I don't know what he was thinking, but I know what the field was saying. It never didn't want to be farmed. It just needed someone to solve the right problem. If you've watched this far, you already know that flooded, wet, waterlogged ground is not hopeless ground. It's misunderstood ground, and misunderstood ground has solutions. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever seen ground like this near you? Ground that everyone wrote off because of one problem that nobody solved? I want to know, because the next farm on this channel might be closer to where you live than you think. Subscribe right now. Hit the bell and stay with us, because every week on this channel is another piece of land proving that impossible is usually just undiagnosed.